By the middle of the 19th century, the contradictions between the northern and southern states of the United States became as aggravated as possible. The fact is that the interests of the North and South were radically different. So the northern states wanted to maximize import duties in order to protect their industries, while free trade was more profitable for the southern states. In addition, the Southerners advocated the maximum sovereignty of each state, and the Northerners sought to strengthen the central authority in the United States. Unlike the northern states, the minimum number of migrants from Europe arrived in the southern states, so they were not able to do without the use of slave labor. At the initial stage, the confrontation between the northern and southern states unfolded in Congress. After vast territories were annexed to the United States following the results of the Mexican-American War, this confrontation escalated as much as possible due to the discussion of whether each of the new states would be slave-owning or free from slavery. When Lincoln came to power, he announced that henceforth all new states would be free from slavery, which meant that in the end the slave states would be in the minority and would not be able to influence U.S. policy. Lincoln's decision brought the confrontation between Southerners and Northerners to a new level. The Southerners were well aware that very soon they would lose their influence in Congress, and therefore they began to take action. The fact is that the Constitution of the United States did not prohibit the withdrawal of individual states from the Union. This was taken advantage of by the state of South Carolina, which on December 20, 1860 announced its secession from the United States. It was followed by the states of Texas, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia and Louisiana. Already on February 4, a provisional Confederate Congress was convened, at which representatives of the 6 states that seceded from the United States announced the creation of the Confederate States of America. By May 20, 1861, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee and North Carolina declared their secession from the United States and joining the Confederate States of America, and the city of Richmond became the capital of the new state formation. On October 7, the Indian Territories, inhabited by the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole tribes, declared their entry into the Confederation. Special mention deserves the fact that the inhabitants of some western districts of Virginia did not agree with the decision to secede from the United States, so they organized their own authorities. Some slave states such as Delaware, Maryland and Missouri and Kentucky remained in the United States and were in no hurry to become part of the Confederation. The main intrigue was the position of the slave state of Maryland, since it was on its territory that the Washington metropolitan area was located. If the state became part of a confederation, then the United States would lose direct communication with its capital. The active phase of the conflict began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter, located in Charleston Bay, and forced its garrison to capitulate. In response to the actions of the Confederation, President Lincoln declared the southern states as rebels and both sides began active preparations for the upcoming hostilities. At the initial stage, a huge number of volunteers came to the army of Northerners and Southerners, but then both sides were forced to resort to mobilization. So during the conflict, the Confederation managed to draft 1,064,000 soldiers into its army, while 2,803,000 soldiers were drafted into the U.S. Army. Due to the fact that most of the fleet remained on the side of the United States, the federal government was able to quickly establish a naval blockade of the ports of the Confederation. April 19, 1861 in Baltimore, there were clashes between local residents who opposed the war and the militias in the service of the United States. After this clash, the people of Maryland dismantled the railroad tracks, thereby cutting off Washington from the rest of the United States. In response to this, additional garrisons of federal troops were introduced into Maryland, thereby eliminating the possibility of the state going over to the side of the Confederation. On May 3, in the western counties of Virginia, whose residents did not want to secede from the United States, the Department of Ohio was formed. On June 27, the U.S. Army under the command of General McClellan set out from the city of Clarksburg and began to move south. On July 9, federal troops reached the outskirts of Rich Mountain, where there were detachments of the Confederates under the command of General Pegram. At the same time, the Second Army of Northerners under the command of Rosecrans entered the rear of Pegram. Rapidly attacking the enemy, she was able to catch him by surprise and took his position. After the victory at Rich Mountain, the Federal troops continued the offensive, which they managed to establish control over all of western Virginia. By the beginning of July, the Confederate Army, numbering about 22,000 soldiers, was concentrated near the city of Manassas. On July 16, the U.S. Army advanced to meet her, numbering 35,000 soldiers. The U.S. command planned to defeat the enemy army, and then capture the capital of the Confederation, the city of Richmond. The battle took place near the Bull Run River on July 21. Despite the fact that at the very beginning the U.S. Army was successful, it did not completely break the resistance of the Confederates. In the end, the Northerners, having suffered serious losses, began a retreat, which turned into a flight. In turn, the Confederates were unable to organize the pursuit of the enemy and inflict maximum damage on him. After the defeat, the commander of the U.S. Army McClellan tried not to take active steps, and a short lull formed at the front. On October 21, 1861, after regrouping, the U.S. Army attacked the Confederate positions in the city of Leesburg. In this battle, luck was on the side of the Confederation, and the U.S. Army, having suffered serious losses, was forced to retreat. In early February, the Army of Northerners under the command of General Grant launched an offensive in the Western Theater of Operations. After defeating the Confederate troops and capturing a number of important forts, the U.S. Army managed to oust the Southerners from Kentucky. General Grant continued the offensive, and on April 8, 1862, the U.S. Army, which stopped near the village of Shiloh in Tennessee, was attacked by the Confederates under the command of General Johnston. The Southerners furiously attacked the positions of the Federal troops. A bloody battle ensued, during which General Johnston was killed. In the end, having failed to cut off the Northerners from the river, the Confederates were forced to retreat. The Federal Army continued to advance, thanks to which it was able to establish control over the state of Tennessee. By the end of the summer, thanks to the successful offensive of the Army of General Grant, the Northerners managed to oust the units of the Southerners from the state of Missouri and establish control over the northern regions of the states of Alabama and Mississippi. At the beginning of 1862, the first battle of ironclad warships in world history took place. March 8, the recently launched battleship of the Southerners, Virginia, went on a test voyage. Having reached the Hampton Roads, the Southerners noticed 5 Federal frigates. Deciding to take advantage of the situation, the captain of Virginia ordered an immediate attack on the enemy. In a naval battle, the Southerners managed to destroy 2 Northerners' frigates, after which on March 9 the Federation fleet brought into battle a new type of battleship monitor. Many hours of firefight ensued, during which the battleships could not cause significant damage to each other. Realizing the futility of continuing the skirmish, the captain of the battleship Virginia gave the order to return to base. Hoping for a quick victory, the Federal command developed a plan to capture the capital of the Confederation, the city of Richmond. The U.S. Army was to attack the Confederate capital from the north, as well as from the Virginia Peninsula. To attack Richmond from the north, the Federal Army under the command of General Banks entered the Shenandoah Valley, which was a convenient route between Washington and Richmond. The Confederates entrusted the defense of the valley to General Jackson. On March 21, Jackson attacked the Federal Army near the city of Kernstown. The attack was unsuccessful and, having suffered losses, he was forced to retreat south to regroup. On April 3, an army of Northerners lands on the Virginia Peninsula and proceeds to lay siege to the city of Yorktown. Due to the poor interaction between the Army and the Navy, the siege of the city progressed very slowly. It was not until May 4 that the Southerners surrendered Yorktown and began to slowly retreat towards Richmond. Meanwhile, General Jackson, having accumulated strength on May 25, was able to defeat Banks' army near the city of Winchester. During this period, the Federal fleet began active operations. On April 25, 1862, a squadron of the U.S. Navy landed troops and managed to establish control over New Orleans. Thus, the Confederates lost control of a major port and an important shipbuilding center, and an important foothold in the lower Mississippi was in the hands of the Federal Army. To stop the advance of the Federal Army from the Virginia Peninsula, the Confederate Army under the command of General Lee advanced towards the enemy. On June 26, the Southerners clashed with the U.S. Army under the command of McClellan on the banks of the Beaver Dam Creek. The bloody battle, which lasted almost the whole day, did not reveal the winner, but in the end the Northerners decided to retreat from their positions. The Confederate Army pursued the enemy every day, attacking him until the Battle of Malvern Hill. The Northerners were able to repulse the attack of the Confederates, inflicting significant damage to them with artillery. General Lee refused further attacks by the Northern Army, as he considered them pointless. The fact is that in the event of an unfavorable outcome, the Northerners always had the opportunity to retreat to the coast, where the fleet could cover them with artillery fire. On July 2, to fight Jackson's army in the Shenandoah Valley, the Federal command sends two armies under the command of Fremont and Shields. Upon learning of the approach of fresh forces of the Northerners, the Confederates began a retreat towards the city of Port Republic. In the vicinity of the city of Port Republic, on July 8, Jackson defeated the Northern Army pursuing him, after which he advanced towards Richmond to join forces with General Lee. On August 3, the Federal Army received orders to abandon plans to attack Richmond and leave the Virginia Peninsula. To distract the Confederates from McClellan's army and allow it to leave the Virginia Peninsula unhindered, the Federal command ordered the newly formed Virginia Army under the command of General Pope to occupy the Shenandoah Valley. On August 15, General Lee, at the head of the main forces, arrived in the combat area. Already on August 29, there was a battle on the Bull Run River, during which the Federal Virginia Army was defeated and was forced to retreat north to strengthen the defense of Washington. On September 4, General Lee's army entered Maryland, planning to isolate and, under favorable circumstances, capture the U.S. capital. Moving deep into enemy territory, General Lee divided his army into several parts. The command of the U.S. Army learned about the actions of the Confederates and decided to defeat the enemy piece by piece. This task was entrusted to General McClellan, who, along with his army, managed to return to Maryland. General Lee guessed the plans of the enemy and ordered all parts of his army to retreat to the city of Sharpsburg. It was near the city of Sharpsburg on the banks of Antietam Creek that the bloodiest battle of the Civil War took place. By the time the battle began, General Lee had about 40,000 soldiers at his disposal, while the strength of the U.S. Army under the command of McClellan was about 75,000 soldiers. As early as September 15, General Lee deployed his available forces on the hills near Antietam Creek and waited for the arrival of the rest of the detachments. On September 16, advanced detachments of the U.S. Army approached the positions of the Confederates. Federal detachments crossed the Antietam River an hour before sunset and engaged in a firefight with the enemy. The skirmish continued until late at night, but did not bring any result. On September 17, at 5 a.m., General Hooker's Federal Corps attacked General Jackson's positions near the German Baptist Church. The U.S. was outnumbered, but the Confederates were in positions perfectly suited for defense. U.S. troops launched an attack on the northern positions of the Confederates, dividing their forces into three parts. From the left, the detachments of General Ricketts advanced, from the right of the position of the Southerners, the detachments of General Doubleday attacked, and in the center, the detachments of General Meade. As soon as the Northerners approached the distance of a cannon shot, the artillery of the Southerners opened fire on them. Northern artillery also began bombarding enemy positions. Detachments of General Meade, having reached the cornfield, came under massive rifle and artillery fire, which did not allow them to continue moving forward. At this time, General Ricketts's attack forces crossed the eastern forest and engaged in a skirmish with the Southern troops under the command of Colonel Walker, but were soon driven back. Having regrouped, the detachments of General Ricketts and Meade launched a new attack, but were driven back by massive fire and a counterattack by the Southerners. The Confederates tried to go on the offensive. They threw the Northerners into the eastern forest, but after the artillery of the Northerners opened fire on them, they were forced, having suffered losses, to return to their original positions. All this time, General Doubleday's detachments continued their attack, and after a long exchange of fire, they managed to drive the Southerners from their positions in the western forest. The Confederates tried to counterattack, but having fallen under heavy artillery fire, their attack bogged down. Taking advantage of the situation, the Northerners continued their offensive, which created a critical situation on the left flank of the Southerners. General Lee decides to hastily transfer additional detachments from the right to the left flank. Jackson only needed to stop the Northerners until reinforcements arrived. At that moment, he remembered the Texas detachment resting after a nightly shootout. Having received the order, the Texas detachment launched a swift offensive, which turned out to be quite successful. Unable to withstand the attack of the Texans, the detachments of the Northerners had to hastily retreat from the western forest. Pursuing the enemy, the Texans entered the cornfield and, falling under artillery fire, were forced to take up positions in the eastern forest. Hooker's 1st Corps suffered huge losses and lost the ability to continue active hostilities. Hooker's Corps was replaced by the 12th Corps under the command of General Mansfield, which consisted mainly of recruits. Fresh forces of the Northerners began to turn into battle formation. At this time, Mansfield rode forward and was mortally wounded. Nevertheless, the Northerners went on the attack. The battle-worn Confederates, who took up positions in the eastern forest, could not withstand the attack of fresh forces of the Northerners and were forced to retreat into the western forest. Taking advantage of this, the Federal detachments continued their offensive and occupied almost the entire plateau on which the church was located. At this time, from the right flank, the division of McLaws, sent by General Lee, arrived, which immediately turned into a battle line and attacked the Northerners. Since most of the 12th Corps of the Northerners consisted of recruits, they could not withstand the attacks of the Southerners and fled. By 10 in the morning the fighting on the left flank of the Confederates subsided as both sides suffered heavy losses. By this time, active operations had begun in the center of the Confederate defensive positions. The 2nd Corps of Northerners under the command of General Sumner launched an attack on enemy positions. The attacking Northerners came under heavy gunfire from the Confederates and, having suffered serious losses, retreated. Both sides received reinforcements, but the Northerners had a numerical advantage, so they launched a new attack. At about 12 noon, the Northerners attacked the Confederate positions. By this time, almost all the commanders of the Southerners in this section of the defense line were wounded or killed. The Confederates, unable to withstand the onslaught of the Northerners, began to retreat, due to which a serious gap formed in the center of the positions of the Southerners. The Northerners tried to take advantage of this, and began to move towards the city of Sharpsburg. Fortunately for the Confederates, their artillery was able to stop the advance of the Northerners with powerful fire, and a desperate attack by a small detachment of Southerners numbering only 200 soldiers bought time, thanks to which the Confederates managed to restore the line of defense. The Northerners had a reserve that could be used for a decisive attack on the center of the Confederate positions, but the reserve commander refused to launch an attack, saying that he was in command of the last reserve of the last U.S. Army and could not risk it. In the afternoon, the 9th Corps of the Northerners, which had been idle all day waiting for orders, launched an attack. First of all, the Northerners needed to capture the bridge, and since they had a fourfold numerical advantage over the enemy, they launched a frontal attack. The Northerners attacked the positions of the Confederates defending the bridge, who resisted fiercely. In the end, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Northerners managed to push the Confederate detachments from the river bank and continue the offensive. General Lee, realizing that his southern flank would not stand against the numerically superior enemy, sent an additional division to him. Meanwhile, the Northerners continued their offensive and by 3 hours 30 minutes managed to reach the outskirts of the city of Sharpsburg. By this time, the division sent to help the southern flank had managed to turn around in line and attack the left flank of the 9th Corps of the Northerners. The detachments of the Federation could not withstand the blow of the fresh forces of the Southerners and began a hasty retreat to the bridge. As a result of the attack of the Confederates, the 9th Corps of the Northerners lost about 20% of its personnel, but still retained a numerical advantage over the opponents. By 5 o'clock in the evening the battle was over. Despite the fact that the Federation army failed to defeat the enemy, the Confederates lost a large number of people, which is why they simply did not have the strength to continue the offensive on Washington. On September 19, the Southern Army left its positions and began to move towards its territory. On November 10, the Northerners made another attempt to attack the capital of the Confederation. The U.S. Army, under the command of General Burnside, numbering 114,000 soldiers, advanced towards Richmond. On December 15, the Northerners clashed with a Confederate army of about 72,000 soldiers under the command of General Lee. The battle took place near the city of Fredericksburg. Despite the numerical advantage, the Northerners suffered a crushing defeat and were forced to retreat. By the end of 1862, the U.S. was still unable to win a decisive victory over the Confederacy. In addition, there was a danger that the British Empire and France, dissatisfied with the blockade of the ports of the southern states, might recognize the independence of the Confederation. In this situation, President Lincoln signs the Proclamation on the Emancipation of the Slaves on December 30th. The actions of President Lincoln were positively received by France, as well as the Russian and British empires, which took a benevolent position towards the United States. Thus the danger of recognition of the independence of the Confederation by the great powers disappeared. On this, the first stage of the confrontation between the southern and northern states ended, but the end of the conflict was still far away. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos.